Should somebody do intro? Am I doing intro?
Oh, I just assumed you were doing intro since you've
Okay.
done the intro the last couple
Okay, I can do intro. Here we go. Welcome back,
go.
graph enthusiasts, to graphstuff.fm, a podcast all about graphs and graph-related technologies. I am your host, Jennifer Reif, and I am joined today by fellow advocates, ABK,
Hello.
Allison Cassette,
Hello.
and Jason Koo.
Hello, everyone.
We are all here. Today, we will be recapping Neo4j's Nodes 2024 event. And we've had some conversations going kind of before we started recording here. So we hope to just kind of continue this fun conversation on with all of you. Does anyone have anything they want to start with?
Yeah, I'll make the meta point first as we're having the conversation about the conversation. That it's always interesting when you get to the end of the year, and particularly I think, with the backdrop of Gen AI as kind of a thing that's happening everywhere, right? And kind of dominates all conversations and all products and all that kind of stuff. And we're like, oh yeah, what did happen in the last year? And what did happen at Nodes? And so much happened that it's almost hard to remember because it's okay. I know a lot of things happened, but pick out a couple of things is super hard. And now focusing in at least on Nodes, okay, that at least collapses the problem space a little bit. So that's nice. But as we think back about Nodes, and I'll just share some of the kind of history of Nodes. So Nodes is our developer conference, or the Neo4j online developer educational summit. Maybe might have been historically the acronym, changed maybe a couple times. Now it's just Nodes.
Mm-hmm.
But this is a virtual online, conference that we do every year. And for the last couple of years, we have quite ambitiously, I think is fair to say, decided on this format where it is a round the clock, follow the sun event that runs for 24 hours, starts in APAC, kind of runs through Europe, then across to North America, with kind of just about continuous sessions all the way through, which is absolutely itself kind of insane. And all of us four here participated in pretty much almost the entire thing, which congratulations to you all. And also I think for job well done, and shout out to Yolande, who's not with us here today, but who is one of our colleagues who just amazingly put all this stuff kind of together. And I think maybe that's my first. So two things, the meta thing about the conversation about the conversation, and then Nodes itself is just such a big deal for us. Just once we're done, we're like, and now a time to reflect back. And now I'm going to pause before I reflect on my reflecting back. And you guys still feel like Nodes is kind of like a highlight of the year, no matter what else has happened, right? Nodes itself kind of stands out. We're like, okay, well, obviously Nodes happened.
I mean, what I appreciate about Nodes, as a marker, is it really gives a snapshot of what's happening in industry at the time. So if we look at the content from this year versus last year versus 2022, we can certainly see it shifted a little bit, right?
Just a little.
Yeah, just a little bit. But I think it's just so interesting to see it as a time capsule and that Polaroid snapshot of where are we right now and what's happening in industry. As I was preparing to talk about it today and looking back over all the sessions that were in the data science track, which was my area, I just love being able to see what people are doing with graphs in the community, right? To see all the different ways that people are expanding and that creativity of where it goes. In the data science track, we had everything from life sciences, biomedical, to one of my personal favorites, which was legislation, how you can use graphs to track legislation. We had structured and unstructured entity recognition. So for the data science nerds, it was great for me to see all the different ways that people are leveraging the technology and those algorithms to really push whatever your subject area is forward in these really fascinating ways. I feel like sometimes being in Neo4j and being in the center of the graph, a very high centrality, we focus on these sort of general types of use cases, and they're just little seeds. And so to see where people take them and how they evolve is just so interesting to me, to see where things are going and what people are doing.
That's one of the things I always find about nodes every year is just the variety of things that people in the community are actually using. And this is a very community driven event. It is very heavily skewed toward community speakers and community involvement, with some participation, of course, from internal Neo4j and other vendors too. But most of the people come from some other companies or contract work, and they're doing really cool things with Graph in whatever industry and data set and like solutions they're trying to build. So that is what's so interesting to me. And in the applications track, which is where I was kind of focused, I saw that as well. Just the amount of content from learning how to use Neo4j with Java to incorporating into some really deep AI technical things to applying it to this data set or that data set, and just using graphs to analyze the natural world around us, I think is always really cool, fascinating.
Yeah, and nodes this year got even bigger, right? So kind of going back to ABK mentioning kind of the meta space of nodes, right? Last year we had 3 tracks, and there were just so many people with so many interesting things to talk about that we had to add a whole extra track. So even though we're confined to the 24-hour limitation, we had to still add a whole extra 25% more space for all these extra speakers and topics.
And we still couldn't accept everything.
Yeah,
Right.
that's right. And that's the thing. Like even along the way, even though we added this extra track, so we couldn't accept everything and even with that, just to fit all of what we did, the overall quality, and we always have high quality, but I feel like this is one of the few years where some of the sessions that I dropped in, and I was like, okay, whoever the speaker is, whatever you're doing, I don't even understand what you're doing. Like I'm like your next level into like whatever it is, your particular domain that I'm just trying to follow along to figure out and understand what you're doing. We know the basics of graphs. We understand graphs as a data structure, graphs as an information architecture, graph querying, graph, system designs. We can do all those kinds of stuff. But when people get into the depth, like in their particular domain expertise, the domain experts that showed up this time around, they're like, okay, wow, you're an amazing domain person. And then you're doing stuff with graphs, which is of course, which we love, but amazing. And as you said, these are community people for the most part. So people out who are using Neo4j or applying it, and just overwhelming what people are doing at such a high level in all these different areas.
Definitely. So I know that as moderators, we were focused on kind of the logistics and making sure everyone was taken care of. But does anyone recall any particular sessions or speakers that kind of like really stood out that you'd like to let's kind of bring attention to? And while everyone else is kind of digging through their memory, I thought about this, and all the sessions I thought were great, but I think the sessions which had 2 speakers really stood out for me, just because I really like 2-person or multi-person type presentations. As Allison knows, like I love doing talks with her. And I think the kind of this default pattern for this is one person will go and then the second half another will go, which is okay. But a couple of ours I was really impressed with, because the 2 speakers kind of went as a pair, right? They didn't just like cut the presentation in half. They were properly co-presenting, right? And the one that I had watched that kind of stuck out to me was the one by Phil Meredith and Christian Stelia, who are from 2 different companies. And they did the talk on building the perfect supply chain chatbot, which was, a fairly straightforward topic. But I liked their interplay, right? It was very clear these 2 had a history and they worked well together. So anyways, that was a session that stuck out to me. Anyone else?
So many. We had I really enjoy first time presenters too, first time visitors to Nodes. So we had Mark Masland come in, and his topic was using a graph database tree and data analytics to model an ancient river system. And it was fascinating to me because he did a really interesting job of bringing in, and again, data science track, bringing in traditional data science and trees and really tying it to something very natural, which is river systems. And I just thought it was such a good way for folks who may be newer to graph to really relate to what is graph, how does it work, what does it connect to. I know one of our keynote speakers last year was it last year or the year before, did something similar where I don't know if anybody remembers who it was. He was talking about different tribes over time and how that relates to graph. Does anybody remember that one? Can't remember what it was. I'll have
Does
to
not
look
ring
it
a
up.
bell. Yeah.
It was so good. And so I just thought that was really interesting too, because so much of the time, to your point, ABK, people are working really deep in their area of expertise. And so to have something that was so relatable and really open, I thought was a good balance. So good job, Mark. We're happy to have him this year.
I'm going to cheat a little bit and say one of the things that I appreciated most, and this occurred, I think, in two different talks. As people are learning about Neo4j, we have an audience that spreads from like people who are really deep into Neo4j, people who are new to Neo4j, but deeper in their kind of expertise. A couple of the talks had good kind of head-to-head comparisons of like, okay, for instance, there was the Cypher versus SQL, benchmarking. Let's see what that looks like. I think that is so useful for people who are new to the space to get an understanding of like, okay, what is a graph? What is it useful for? That's interesting. But there's always in the back of their heads, if you've done relational work, in your head you're thinking, okay, yeah, but I could do that with a relational database. Here's what I would do. Like you could probably imagine for a particular domain how you would fine tune, a schema. And so then it's like, okay, at what point is it, okay, you can't really do that easily with a relational database, or there's a performance concern or those kinds of things. And having sessions on that is always really useful, because let's just talk about it, because sometimes it is really a relational thing. Like if you're going to just, my favorite go-to is if you take everybody who joined nodes and want to alphabetize them. Yes, you can do that with Neo4j. That is not particularly graphy. That, maybe that would be better with Postgres. Awesome, if that's what you want to do. But if you want to find out, hey, who are people like me that are working in my area? That's a graph question. You want to use a graph for that. So it's easy on the question level, but then, okay, what are the performance kind of ramifications of that? So digging into that, I thought was really interesting. Similar thing happening on like doing vector search versus doing graph rag and trying to compare those two approaches. We know we want to use RAG if you're doing Gen AI applications. That's the retrieval augmented generation kind of access pattern thing. And yet there's always the question, okay, everyone talks about using a vector search. When would you want to use a graph? Same kind of idea. Okay, sometimes you do want to start with a vector search and then maybe add graph to it. Sometimes you have graph stuff and you want to have some of it in a vector search as well, doing cosine similarity perhaps. Thinking about those sides really helps people who are coming new to graphs, because you already have a frame of reference. So both the kind of performance comparison is useful, but also just as a trying to understand where this fits in your world, because we're all developers. We know millions of different tools. When you're going to reach for VS Code, and sometimes you're just going to reach for I don't know, a text note or something, like because you don't need VS Code for just typing down a to-do list or whatever it might be, right? Or it might be a Google Doc. These are all just things that do text, but we use all these different tools, right? So knowing where the tools fit is super helpful. So I think that's something that I loved that content came through in the sessions.
And I'll actually jump onto that point, which is there were a couple of sessions early on in the entire event, but in the APAC track that started the whole thing off, that kind of did that as well. They focused on things that were kind of earlier in the graph journey. So one was talking about Neo4j and Next.js, full stack relationship. That was like the intro session for the applications track at Nodes. And what I really liked there is the presenter did live demo, live coding, as well as explanation, which I feel like is it's a less common thing to find. And I believe this person might have also been a new speaker, which is pretty brave and impressive to jump on to that, kind of live coding. Let's showcase this thing and let me show you how it works kind of stuff. I don't know a lot about Next.js, so it was totally out of my element for that, but just something that I noticed and really respected out of that session. And then the other one that kind of stuck in my mind was the APOC and Java session. And I think that APOC is one of those tools that we automatically take for granted because most people probably within the Neo4j space know how to use it or have used it in some way, shape, or form, some more than others, of course. But it's a very kind of intro Neo4j type concept because it is so utilized. And I think that sometimes we overlook some of those simpler starter concepts and topics. And this was a topic, it was only a lightning talk, but this was something that kind of filled that gap a little bit and at least introduced people to what is this thing and how do you get kind of up and running with it.
Yeah. And Jen, for those folks who haven't run into APOC yet, what is APOC?
Yeah, so it's an extension utility library that contains procedures and functions to do pretty much everything under the sun. So there's machine learning and data science algorithms in there. There's lots of import export utilities for various data stores or data types like JSON, CSV, plugins, and integrations with lots of different tools and technologies you might use on a day-to-day basis. There's text manipulation and translation functions. There's, I mean, just anything and everything. The list continues to be beyond fathoming. It's huge, but really powerful, very easy to use stuff. But it is a library you have to add on to Neo4j. Some of it does come prepackaged, but in a lot of cases it doesn't.
Yeah, at this point, it's been kind of divided into basically kind of a standard library. It's like, okay, you get this, like in Aura, you'll get out of the box, I don't know,
Right.
100 or so procedures. I don't know what the count is, but you get a lot.
Yeah.
But then there's yet more available in the kind of the extended package. And for those of you who might be taking notes for your Neo4j trivia night, APOC, wait, I'm going to ask you guys
Oh,
first.
we should do
You know the
that.
reference, right?
For the character,
Yes.
right? Yeah.
Does anyone? Jen, you must know
What
for sure.
What APOC stands
Character
for?
from the Matrix, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Okay,
it's both an
I-
acronym and it's a movie reference to the Matrix.
It was one of the supporting characters.
Yeah.
Was it in
It-
the first
was it-
Matrix?
First
In the
Matrix,
first
yes.
Matrix, it was APOC, and I think was his brother named Mouse or
Switch?
something? Switch.
Oh.
That's right. Oh,
Oh,
great. Now
boy.
I'm going to forget the actual trivia. Darn. But it was definitely it was one of the minor characters in the first Matrix.
I have a
I'm
very
gonna
sad
rewatch that.
admission. I've never seen it.
What?
How? What? Your
Okay,
dev
put
creds are
aside the rest
full.
of our agenda.
I know.
Stop it.
How did that
You
happen?
didn't you didn't see that in your onboarding documents? Must watch Matrix series. If you're going to work at
Yeah,
Neo4j.
well, I'll give the excuse that I've been so busy learning the technology that I have not gone back and watched The Matrix.
Well,
Wow.
admittedly, we're
We're
all
gonna have
going
to
to
add
be
this
in the
to the
same
show
place
notes at least
sometime
at this
soon. And I think we're having movie night at the next time we're all in the same
That's-
place.
That sounds like a
Fantastic
good plan.
idea.
I was going to say, otherwise it'll end up being on my holiday break movie list.
There
for
we
sure.
go.
Wow.
Anyway,
I
back
didn't
to
know
notes.
that.
Sorry.
Oh, okay. Yes, nodes. I want to talk about fireside chat, which was like one of the highlights of nodes.
Yay.
And so I was just briefly looking back, and I thought last year's venue was the same as this year's, but the only thing that's actually the same, other than ABK and Emil, is the background IKEA thing with the portraits and all
Trivia.
the trinkets.
Yeah.
But actually, the room and the couch and everything, they're all different. And I was like, oh, my memory had clearly misread. But yes, so the fireside chats, if you get a chance, the last one is always funner, I guess, than the earlier ones. And everyone on staff who wasn't around for last year's nodes, the final fireside chat, were like, I would say, in a minor panic at the end of this year's one. And I think half the people were like, oh my God, somebody call ABK. They've fallen asleep or not fallen asleep, but like you guys gave the appearance of like not paying attention, right? And we're like, okay, we're just gonna go home, and it had to like calm people down. No, just wait.
It's coming. It's coming.
It's part of the shtick. They're just really selling it. They're great actors. Yeah, and so that reference, Jason, to last year's. Last year was the one where I think it was actually Emil's suggestion. Actually, he was like, "Hey, it's been a really long day. We should just pretend that we've fallen asleep." I was like, "All right, let's go with it." And so we did that last year, and like you're right, the couch. It was the same couch, but it was in the Malmo office, in Sweden, and we used that same couch this year, but we moved it into the kitchen because the kitchen gave us better angles. And
so you guys actually, yeah, my memory is that you guys were on the couch last year too, but I just watched the video. You guys are on individual, like not loafy chairs, but you guys are on individual chairs. The couch is only this year, or maybe the year.
No, so then it's then it might have been 2 years ago. Wait, which year? I thought it was last year.
They're all blurry.
It's all blending
Now they're all
together.
blurring. One year we were on separate chairs. One year was the couch in the same location, and then we moved the couch into the kitchen. And then this year the end of the session idea was, okay, we're just gonna get up and leave, and then have Michael call us back, which is what we did.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad to hear that
Oh
we
my
sold it well
God.
enough. And of course, we told nobody. And in fact, even the people that working the cameras on location, they were like, guys, and we're like, oh, sorry, we'll come back.
Oh, that was great because you can hear the cameraman speaking, and adding Michael was fantastic. It was like, oh, great, we got a third cast member.
So we'll
I
have
mean,
to
Michael
build on
needs
that.
to make an appearance no matter what.
I think that's right. I think we're gonna have to just build on that every year. So
Yeah.
people have suggestions for skits. This will turn into like an SNL kind of thing at this point. Like
Yeah.
now that we've done it a couple times, now it's just part of the routine, the kind of closing monologue, or I don't know what it is exactly. So if you guys have
Well, it
ideas for
reminds
that,
me. Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of the Marvel movies where everybody stays through the credits to see what actually happens at the end. Like, what's the big tease at the end?
There you
So
go.
it's
that's right.
you know, if you've made it through 24 hours of nodes, you deserve a little extra entertainment. Like, let's be honest.
Yeah.
It is really a marathon of its own kind. So I
And
appreciate the entertainment value.
I think it re-engaged people a little bit too before you had kind of that closing session because again, everybody's exhausted and not maybe brain overwhelm or overload by the end of 24 hours. And so to kind of throw the audience off a little bit and even internal folks, it kind of forces your brain to kind of readjust or reconnect a little bit. And so that might have actually helped. I know it did me. It kind of clicked my brain. I was like, oh, wait, what's going on? Kind of thing. And then all of a sudden you're diving into content and my brain's back awake again. So
Yeah.
that was it was fun, but it also served a really valuable purpose too, which was to re-engage people right at the closing session.
Yeah.
That was part of the plan.
Of
It was
course
part of
it was, yeah.
our genius insight. We weren't just messing
Brilliant.
around. We actually thought, what we need to do is wake the audience back up. But I love
Yeah,
that is fantastic.
we know
feedback.
that was not the intention, but
But I'm going to take
It
credit
was
for that.
super
I'm going to say
helpful.
like that was genius insight on our part. And actually, now that you say that, yeah, without overthinking it, we should just continue to go with it, right? Like if we try to think about it too much, it's just not going to work. I think anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's good to have a little bit of fun with it. And I think as well, like some aspect of this is that we, by giving ourselves license to do that, for people who are participating in nodes, it's like, you know what? I know this is live, basically broadcast around the world right now, but you're kind of all among friends. Everybody who's
Yes.
watching is just like us, right? And even for
Yes.
us doing this right now, okay, who's going to watch this? Folks like us are going to watch this. And there's no pretense about anything. We're just a bunch of nerds talking about nerd stuff, I guess. Right?
100%.
We know the truth. Let's not pretend, right? And so hopefully that gives everybody else some sense of a license to kind of relax and just talk and just do their thing and have a little
Yeah.
fun if they want to, of course, as well.
Maybe we should introduce that next year, right? Some sort of comedy award or something.
Session.
Yeah, for session speakers, like
That's a good
vote for your. Well, maybe voting makes it too serious, but yeah, no, I agree. Like just have fun, right? When you have fun, the audience, the listeners have fun, and it also helps with memory.
That makes me think.
Yeah.
Maybe instead of voting, or we could pseudo vote on things, like if we find a right way to do that, it'd be nice to have basically superlatives at the end as part of the ending session. It'd be like, okay, session most likely to put people asleep. Okay, maybe that's not fair.
Oh no! Oh jeez. Hopefully it's that last fireside chat.
Exactly. But come up with a couple of fun, superlative categories instead of like, best data science research or something like. Okay,
I think we should consider giving folks the license to drop in some Easter eggs So
Mm.
feel free to drop in a matrix, a matrix reference somewhere in your talk. Could be good.
There you go.
Have people keep an eye out for them.
Oh, yeah.
Who
Yes.
knows? Who knows? It's going to be a big surprise, whatever it is. We have a whole year to come up with something.
Hmm.
Although
kind of
Yolande
grass-
has asked not to
Oh.
have any ideas until at least the beginning of next year.
Okay. Well, we don't have to share them with her.
True.
She needs a good breather.
Break.
But yeah, I
Ooh.
mean, it really, again, to get back to the original concept of nodes, I mean, what just impresses me so much about the graph community is, EBK, to your point, the sort of realness and the openness. I've literally spent the last year traveling around the world to all of our different communities, as everybody knows. And the one consistent thing that I see is just enthusiasm and curiosity. All right. And I don't know that
Yeah.
I've seen that in this particular style in other communities. And I just think there's something very, maybe it's because it's all about connections. I don't know. But there's just something very warm about the Neo4j and the graph community. And some of it, I think we also see as we're having this conversation, is very much in the culture of our company and sort of who we are. And so it's just great to see that ease and that warmth and that curiosity and camaraderie, both internally and externally when we associate with the community and when folks are working amongst themselves. So I don't know if it's like that in other communities, but it's just something that's I've been at Neo4j a little over 2 years, and it's been such a great part of why I love what I do. And being in developer relations is to participate in that around the world, whether virtually or in person. It just feels pretty special to me.
I will kind of vamp on that point, which is maybe it is something about graphs, but I have always seen graphs as solving puzzles, and I've always liked to solve puzzles. So maybe it is something about just inherently in the technology that makes it such a curious, innovative space, being that, hey, we're solving puzzles through data connections and looking at data in different ways
Mm.
that you can't see in other technologies, that it makes it more apparent in graph. And it's just something about that puzzle nature. Let's see what we can find out with our data now.
That's
I think
an
graphs are-
observation. Yeah,
go
like,
ahead, ABK.
I was just thinking, like, Jen, like that whole point about the puzzle. I hadn't considered that aspect in the way that you framed it just right now, because now it makes me think. If you think about different communities, as we're talking about now, like if you imagine in your mind, what does the crossword community look like? You're not going to think those people are psychopaths and killers or something. They're not. They're probably very introspective, detail-oriented, thoughtful people, right? And like they're
Yeah.
like there's probably a vibe to them that's, actually they're really interesting. They really notice a lot of detail. They're like, matching across things and all the things that occur. That there is some crossover of that mindset all the way over to graphs. And of course, now I'll think, what was the movie? There's a movie reference here when, oh my gosh, when they were building the Enigma machine, and it was Alan Turing like interviewing people, and like he wanted people who were good at crossword puzzles, right? He's like, okay,
Yes.
I'm not. This is what I'm
Yes.
looking for. Get me people who are good at crosswords. Like that's the
Yes.
the brain I want in here. And I feel like maybe there's something to that. Like the nature of people who like that kind of problem also tends to be good at these other kinds of problems and tend to be nice people somehow, right? Like it's
Wait,
all.
is
It's not.
Is there a Venn diagram collision between psychopaths and crossword puzzle folks? That's common knowledge. That that reference we had earlier. I was like,
I like crosswords, so you're putting me in a very dangerous.
I love crossword puzzles. Like, love them. When I'm older, so when I used to do them every day in the New York Times, like on paper. And when I was in college, I don't know why I'm sharing this right now. You would often find I would do them before I went to bed. And I would also often find myself in the morning with an open dictionary and a half-done crossword puzzle, and I'm like, So there's definitely something to graphs and crossword for sure.
nice.
Jason, I think
Uh,
you were going to add
This might be a
something.
future episode.
oh, I was just your mention of
Yeah.
graphs and puzzles. Just it reminded me. There was a team at one of the hack nights most recently that very quickly built a kind of like a whodunit game based off of
Ooh,
Neo4j and using Weave, the vector database. So they had this clever
cool.
setup where
Nice.
this logic router would, depending on the clue or the question, it would route to either graphs or vector. But they had created all the artwork, AI generated, but the characters, and they explained the
So
story. And
cool.
I was just like, yeah, that type of story or those type of games are very graph friendly. You can
Yeah.
construct them fairly easily with a graph, which in other systems would be quite complex, right? It'd become very nested. And Guy Royce from Redis, when he was doing graph talks, he had this great series talking about, look, so we're going to build like a Dungeons and Dragons kind of game, and one approach is using relational database and the other is using graph, and he used that to highlight the differences between the two. And then as the game became more complicated, it was like, okay, very clearly graphs is going to make your life a whole lot easier, and as you get thicker, SQL is going to be, you're going to have some very large queries.
Oh, that's really cool. I love that idea. And we talked to Michaela from Mod a couple episodes ago, and she was doing storytelling and content, in that way through graphs, and just again showing that capability of going from one thing to the next and following these patterns and incorporating side stories and, other things involved is so cool through graphs.
Yeah, no, totally.
I'm going to reflect on this as one of the graph both advantages and challenges, I guess I'll say. Because in all of these things, what I think is interesting, and we haven't found a good way to kind of talk about this in Gen AI space, but there's an echo of this in Gen AI as well, where, as you're saying, Jason, like with that example of like progressing along building this game, graphs are they may not be something you use on the first day because you think it's not necessary, but like we know that actually whatever you're doing, you might start off with something that's very simple. It's like, okay, I don't need a graph to do this simple thing I'm doing. But you might tomorrow, you more likely you're going to the next day. The more days you spend on any problem space, the more likely the thing that you're doing
Mm,
is actually more naturally and easily expressed as a graph. And it's harder to fit that in once you've gone further down and you're like, oh my gosh, I've made a mistake. I've got to redo. But a little bit of advanced kind of design thinking. Actually, I'd even say like, okay, what am I trying to do? What are the boundaries here and all that? The graphs are like, oh, actually, it's much more apparent as a fit. Whereas if you're thinking much more like kind of iteratively, I'm just going to do one thing, one thing, one thing, you may not see it until you're a couple of steps down and you're like, oh, yeah, totally should have used a graph.
mm,
Do you
Yeah.
buy that?
If you ever look at someone's production UML diagram of what they've got actually deployed or something
Yeah.
near production, it is always so incredibly dense and complex. It's like, hey, this is a graph. You realized, right?
mm.
But it's very fine tuned from this one row or one property goes to. Yeah, I mean, just look up UML diagrams of a proper system that includes at least a few tables, and I think you'll very quickly see, oh, yes, this becomes a very complex web that, as a graph, I mean, if you're familiar with operating in a graph data space, becomes easier. But you're right. Most people aren't going to notice until they've built a number of systems and try to connect everything to cover all the edge cases. Like, oh, wait, I've got
Yeah.
spaghetti now.
Yeah. It makes me it makes me kind of wish that we could sort of sprinkle those graph seeds everywhere. I mean, I guess that is kind of our job. So there's that. It is
If
kind of
only
what
we
we
would
do all
hire
day,
some
every
people
day.
to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, imagine only if people could go out and talk to the community about what's possible with graph. That'd be great. But I think that is a really good point that I never thought about, in that graph is inevitable. And when we think through how systems get developed, I was at a conference recently and I was talking to a company where they actually talk about knowledge graphs all the time.
Mm.
And I asked them if it was built on Neo4j. And it's actually built on a relational database, and they've got triples in a table. And it was just really fascinating to me because I asked them, I was like, I'm just really curious, why did you go that route? And it was a legitimate answer, which is, well, we didn't have anybody on staff who knew how to use it. So we just sort of hacked our way into it with what we had, right? Which is very, you know, developer native. I'm just going to use the tools that I have until it can't handle it anymore. But I think it is a really interesting point that graphs are inevitable. Yeah, that's a good one. I'm going to sit with that one for a while. I
Yeah,
like it.
I like that slogan or motto. Maybe we should get some T-shirts or
It just
You're
sounds
gonna have to come
mildly
over eventually. You might as well do it now. Come
yeah.
on, just give in already. It's inevitable. Just crap it up. Come on.
Well, for anyone who is not in the graph community yet, come see Nodes. You will definitely be
yes.
a graph addict at the end of that. So
Yeah, for sure.
That'll be our 5th track for next year. That's,
graphs are
graphs
inevitable.
Graph addicts.
or that.
Oh
Um,
my gosh.
any predictions for nodes for next year?
Ooh.
It's gonna be
Predictions.
tough. I mean, I'm predicting that fireside chat will get even funnier, which is already a pretty high bar to I think to exceed. But
Yes, that is true. I'll be honest
So
with you. I think the number of submissions is going to really just continue to grow. I think we're going to have a really big uptick in submissions next year, partially because with all that's being sort of exposed and educated about the role of graph in AI, I just think that the more people are going to be playing with it and exploring, and I think we're just going to have a really big increase in submissions.
so we will need a 5th track.
Yeah, to Allison's point, I was kind of thinking, I think we'll be looking at ways to involve more content, whether that's in the actual day itself with another track or extending past 24 hours a little bit or something, or tacking on like a post nodes or pre nodes, which we already do the pre nodes training sessions, but I think we will be looking for ways to showcase more content.
I think that's probably right. And I'm going to put a challenge on Yolande's plate.
Because Yolande
And-
needs more of a challenge when it comes to
Like if
nodes.
adding another track is one way to make things even more ambitious. I'm going to say that next year it's going to be a hybrid event where it's going to have international watch parties in major cities. Every major, so we'll have one in Bangalore, we'll have one in Paris, we'll have one in New York. Live watch parties where at the watch parties we'll have supplementary talks or
I love
sessions going
that.
on. So there'll be
Hmm.
let's watch the stuff, let's do some in-person things. That's my prediction
I
or
love that.
/ challenge.
I like it.
Yeah.
And Yolande says, have at it, ABK. Enjoy scheduling those. I'm going to be over here
Yeah.
managing
I
24
hear a
hours of
volunteer.
of the number of sessions and the amount that goes into this event is already astronomical.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
Yolande's very happy you volunteered for that, ABK.
Jason, do you have any final thoughts?
Let's see on nodes. Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with everyone, right? We're going to have to handle more content in some form or fashion. And we're already talking about like different ways we can kind of make the experience slightly different, right? I love the idea of bringing in person with this already, very large event. One thing we had talked about in the past was to try to bring all the speakers into one space. So at least the speakers and and Neo4j folks could mix in person. But of course, logistically, that's really tough, right? Like, you're going to bring everyone together and then force a third of them to stay through the morning. And, like it becomes physically very demanding. So yeah, I guess final words on nodes would be, come check it out. If you haven't, participated in nodes, take a look at some of the videos and definitely keep an eye out for next year's. If you follow any of us at the lead up, we will be, we always will be mentioning nodes almost from the beginning of the year and then really at a high tempo right prior to the event. So if you follow any of us, you won't miss it. but I definitely invite you to carve out at least a little time to check it out.
Yep. And it is already scheduled for next fall. So keep your ears out for that. And the 2024 Nodes playlist is now live. So you can go back, and if you weren't able to participate live or missed a bunch of sessions, I know I did, I will be going back and reviewing those videos. I would encourage you to do so as well. It's a lot of great content.
Graphs are inevitable, and so is nodes.
All right. And with that, we will talk to everybody in the next session. Bye.
Bye, all.
Bye.